Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, "My boss told me to wait longer for deliveries. I did and I got paid for $16.50 per hour for sleeping. I do overnight deliveries for 5 locations of a chain store. I get paid per deliver, not by the hour. My manager told me I can deliver the overnight deliveries anytime at night as long as the shipment reaches the stores before 7:30 a.m. when the stores open. I have keys to all except the last store on my delivery route. I would try to finish my deliveries by 7 a.m. but I have to wait half an hour for the last store to open. I complained to my manager saying I need that key for the overnight deliveries. My manager kept on ignoring my requests. It went on for a month. I wasted half an hour every day because of him. One day I just skipped the delivery for the last store because I couldn't take the wait anymore. This made my manager furious. He called me and ordered me to wait by the last store until it opens. I told him I don't want to wait. He said the company will pay me $16.50 per hour for the wait. I happily said okay. The next night I started my deliver extra early and I reached the last store by 1 a.m. I use an app to sign in whenever I reached a store, then I sign out when I'm leaving the store. So I signed in to the last store at 1 a.m. and went to sleep until 7:30 a.m. Then I delivered and signed out. The company paid me $16.50 per hour just to sleep. This carried on for 2 weeks until the manager got scolded by the higher-ups and I got my key. Next one is titled, "You're Not a Team Player. As You Wish." This story is a couple years old and like many things on the internet you wait for the heat to die off to reduce the chance of recognition by the parties involved. I've seen a lot of malicious compliance posts against managers. This is one of a manager complying with employee demands. I was leading a team of technicians that included an on-call component. Every 4 to 6 weeks it was your turn on the roster to carry the phone and be available 24/7. You could live your life normally, but we advised techs not to plan a family event they can't leave unexpectedly, or a weekend trip more than an hour or 2 away from the office while on call. If you wanted to change the schedule, you needed a colleague to volunteer to swap. The roster was generated a few months in advance and we had a very firm rule after being burned a couple times: no change is permanent until it's confirmed in the schedule, meaning myself or my supervisors have received a written confirmation from both parties. People have a tendency to change plans, so we made sure the team knew the bare minimum was an email from both techs agreeing to the change, then we update the schedule, then it is locked in stone. There are a few players to this melodrama. Me, the manager of all the teams in the area. My supervisor for Bob's team, Henry. The tech receiving malicious compliance, Bob, and the young tech who got screwed out of a weekend, Jim. Jim wants to attend a concert on a weekend he's scheduled to be on call. Jim successfully convinces Bob over lunch to swap with him and sends us an email to confirm. Very important to note that Henry and a few others are eating lunch with them. Henry hears the whole conversation. Bob does not reply with his acceptance, so there's no changes made at that time and everyone goes home for the day. When Bob eventually came clean, I learned what happened next. Bob mentions to his wife that evening the week on call he will swap with Jim. Bob's wife is not happy with this, and points out she wants to see her mother that weekend, so she demands he swaps back. Normally, if Bob had confirmed the change it would be 100% his job to find a volunteer to take over, but Bob realizes he never agreed via email, so decides to play sneaky. He was a bit of a macho kind of guy, so I think a lot of what happened next was based on avoiding the appearance of his wife telling him what to do. The next day Bob responds in writing that actually there was not an agreement and he wouldn't take the shift. Taking everyone by surprise is the fact he didn't frame it as, "Actually I can't take that shift," but instead went with, "Jim is lying, I never said that." Jim is upset he'll miss his concert, but per the rules, he is out of luck. There's suddenly tension in the office and techs taking sides between Bob and Jim. Not a great situation for esprit de corps, so it's time for management to get involved. Henry wants to handle it, but he's a bit too riled up, so I pull Bob aside instead. I ask Bob what's going on, hint that multiple people have upheld Jim's version of events. Is there something we can do here to ease the tension? I'm asking you to be a team player here and come clean for me. You don't have to take the shift, but I don't like when techs are mudslinging each other. No, says Bob, Jim is a liar and the rest of them must have heard it wrong or they're lying too. I never agreed to this and I don't want to be a team player with these liars. You don't want to be a team player, is that right? Yes. I'm just going to look out for myself since I can't trust these young guys on the team like Jim. Whatever you say, Bob. Cue the malicious compliance. For the rest of the year, every time Bob needed a hand, he was left hanging, within reason. I'm not risking my own performance numbers here. Difficult job that would be easier with two? Sorry Bob, all the older team members are scheduled elsewhere. You'll have to do it alone since you don't trust these younger techs. Bob wants a hand moving some equipment to the delivery van. Sorry, the team is busy with other tasks. I'm sure you can handle it solo. Bob got the picture pretty quick that severing himself from the team was a bad idea, but from stubbornness or machismo he stuck it out and refused to come clean or stop glaring at the newer team members. Evidently, to preserve his version of events he had to maintain an air of distrust for the younger techs, or he just blamed them collectively, I don't know. That carried on until end-of-year reviews came around. In our office you could pick a few personal objectives and this was a great way to get a good review even if we had a bad year. For example, some people set educational goals and got a new certificate or two in the company e-learning portal which, if achieved, would lift their average performance score. Bob in his infinite wisdom had listed a few personal objectives that were remarkably social in nature. Teamwork was one. Sharing knowledge with new team members was another. These were pretty good objectives for an older, more experienced tech who could lend a hand to teammates and get some positive feedback to show his bosses by the end of the year. These were not good objectives to have when you have very clearly stated you are not a team player and have been working almost completely solo for half the year. The fallout. Bob took a pretty big hit on his performance scores that year. It lowered his bonus by a few $100 and for the first time in years there were no glowing reviews by colleagues that he could use to his advantage, not to mention his own words being thrown back in his face on all his personal objectives. I had Henry signal me quietly as the meeting was winding down so I could drop by and add my 2 cents. To a very crestfallen Bob I asked, still feeling like you don't want to be a team player, Bob? We missed your old self these past few months. Bob takes a moment to respond and then starts laughing. He shakes his head a bit and answers, "You're right, I do miss being a team player. Things got a little out of hand. I think I'll focus on that for next year." I told him I was glad to hear it, gave a wink to Henry, and their meeting continued in a much more positive note after I left. The whole saga had taken 6 months, but, in the end, Bob apologized to Henry for lying. The next week Bob took Jim out for lunch and he spent the next year being the absolute gold star example of a team player. I spent some political capital arguing with HR and was able to give him a raise at his next review in recognition of his efforts. Next one is titled, "No Keeping Per Diem Money, No Receipts Equals No Reimbursement." A couple decades ago, I traveled a lot for business, between 30 and 35 weeks a year. Initially I looked forward to the romance of travel, only to discover it was endless awakenings, feeling like the rohypnol had just started to wear off. But I digress. I had a really great boss who gave us a standard meal per diem. I think it was $30 per day. This worked great for me. I'd grab the complimentary continental breakfast in the lobby, typically be too busy to eat lunch, and grab something from Subway on the way back to the hotel. Not the healthiest way to live, but it added up to an extra $100 plus per week. Eventually he sells the company to a new boss. I return from a trip and submit my per diem request. He denies it, and since I didn't keep the receipts, I had to pay for all my own meals on that trip. I explained the previous arrangement and ask if we could do it that way. He tells me, no, if you don't have a receipt, you don't get reimbursed. He drafted and printed the policy. 3 meals a day, no more than a 15% tip, no room service, no snacks, no desserts, no alcohol. Okay, have it your way. My next trip was to the Bay Area of California, which was insanely overpriced then too. I decided I would follow the new policy to the letter. We all know that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, so steak and eggs is the smart way to start the day in the nearby 4-star hotel. Realizing I wasn't getting enough steak and lobster in my diet, I went for the surf and turf special for dinner. And since I wouldn't have time for lunch the next day, another to go please, kind sir. It was a glorious week of finding the most expensive things I could both pronounce and b eat. I returned to the office and submitted my expenses, with receipts of course. Instead of $150 that week, the company wrote me a check for over $700. The new boss quickly rescinded that policy, allowing me my $30 per diem again, and I could keep what I didn't use. Next one is titled, Please reach out to your supervisor for additional training, say no more. I've worked for this health insurance for almost 4 years, and not to toot my own horn, but I'm good at my job. I make sure updated info that members make get routed to where they need to go if they need an override. Someone needed to override their primary care doctor, so I sent the request to the queue that I've always sent it to. This morning I find the request gets routed back to me. Every time a request gets routed, you have to leave a note or a request summary, and it shows the interaction in the account for anyone in the company to see. The note that was left for me said this request is invalid. This queue is only for X members. Please reach out to your supervisor for additional training. Thank you. Record scratch. The audacity to notate an account like that is just unprofessional. How can you be so loud and yet so wrong? When I look his name up in my work Skype, I find that he's a supervisor himself. I responded with quotes from the workflow the call center has explaining the queue is for all members and asked if it should be updated. So I then send an email to both of my supervisors and I CC him as well since it was his suggestion. I attach the link to the workflow and I take screenshots of the title of the work basket that says all members and added a screenshot of the exact queue I sent it to. I explained what I did and the response I got was from a supervisor, so I'm just following orders. I then get the response back, hello, yes, this is my fault. I was under the impression I was working a different queue. My apologies. Something about the apology just made me laugh so hard. Shortly after I get an instant message from my supervisor saying, apology not accepted. Next one is titled, Company requires using our airline miles for work trips? Another fun story of an obnoxious boss. I used to travel a lot for business, between 30 and 35 weeks a year. Our boss was a frequent traveler as well, and taught us the tricks of the trade for accumulating frequently flyer miles and especially status, a really great perk. Eventually he retired and sold the company to new boss. New boss overheard that I had over 500,000 frequent flyer miles with my airline, not credit card points, and said he should implement a new policy that we had to use our personal frequent flyer miles for our business travel, since the company had paid for our trips. That weekend my wife and I sat down and booked weekend trips all over the country over the next year. Boston for clam chowder? Check. New York City for a Broadway show? Check. Garlic Fest in Gilroy, CA, a real and delicious thing, by the way? Check. By Monday morning, my airline frequent flyer mile account was down to about 15,000 miles. Later that week it was time to book a trip and he said I had to use frequent flyer miles. I brought up my account and showed him I didn't have enough miles. He asked where they went, and when I said I had booked some trips, he demanded I redeposit the miles. I pointed out there was a $150 charge per person and that since it wasn't policy, I wasn't going to pay it. Upset, he announced going forward we needed approval for personal use of our personal frequent flyer miles. Okay, boss. You bet. My next step was to spread my flights over any and every airline I could find to prevent accumulating the 20,000 miles required to redeem for a free ticket. I was on United, Frontier, American, Delta, Northwest, Continental, US Air, Southwest, etc. At one point I think I booked a trip on the Mrs. Grace L. Ferguson airline and Storm Door Company. Google it, it's a Bob Newhart routine, and more true now than when he performed it 60 years ago. He eventually figured out what I was up to, and he lost what little patience remained for me. Then the following, paraphrased, took place. Boss, I suppose you think you're a smart guy. Me, no, I know I'm a smart guy. Boss, don't get cute. Me, no, I'm smart. Cute is just a bonus. Look, I see my wife about 10 days a month. I live out of a suitcase. I know the aircraft evacuation speech by heart. Most of my meals are handed to me through a window. And thanks to my willingness to do this, you make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Can you please just let me keep the only perk I get from all this? Boss thought about it for a bit, grunted, fine, keep your miles. And walked away. Edited to clarify, these were airline frequent flyer miles, not credit card points. Sorry about the confusion. Next one is titled, You Can Only Wear Jeans If You Pay. So going back some years in our healthcare office, where the employees were coming and going constantly due to the high stress and terrible management, the one good thing we had was that every Friday, myself and the other coordinators got to wear jeans for Casual Friday. It was great because 1. No one ever saw us, so dressing up sucked, and 2. It helped with going out after work and not needing to dress down to feel comfortable. Then one day after years, I worked there for 7.5 in total, the marketing manager Deb noticed we all wore jeans on Friday and for some reason decided that wasn't good. She had a tendency of always ensuring we donated to causes and charities. But only hers. If it wasn't for something she personally had to deal with, we weren't supposed to support it, i.e. One time we all got together and donated a bunch of money to buy a goat and some other things for a village in Africa, and she went ape crap because we didn't give her money for her own personal charity for breast cancer. So one day in a meeting, she along with HR announced that Casual Fridays were no longer allowed, and if we wanted to wear jeans on Fridays, we'd have to pay Deb $2 as a donation for the charity of her choosing. We tried to complain and bring up the fact this was literally the only free thing we got as a perk for being employees that stuck around for years. But Deb insisted that it wasn't right and that we should have to pay. So, we just didn't. We didn't wear jeans anymore. A few people wore leggings, tights, but Deb managed to get HR to say that was casual and would have to pay. So they stopped wearing them too. We just wore our dress pants as usual. Deb would come upstairs from her dungeon on Friday and I spy to find anyone who was wearing something that was casual to claim her dollars, but to no avail. She tried complaining to HR that we weren't in the spirit of charity, and they tried to convince us it was the right thing to do. We refused. I think a few actually demanded receipts of previous donations so they could claim them on taxes. We assumed Deb was doing this from the get-go. So that's how Casual Fridays died, because we refused to pay. Next one is titled, Work Wants Me to Document What Projects Take Up My Time, which means documenting the time it takes to write it up. At a job I had many moons ago, it was a relatively small company, but experiencing a lot of growing pains in a rapidly expanding market. I was hired into a specific, long-established department, but after a few years specializing enough at troubleshooting that they created a position for me and several others to instead float around to help others. It was a dynamic position of not only troubleshooting projects, but filling in for any roles that need extra bodies that week, etc. In the parent department, any individual would have 3 to 4 major projects at any given time. The timecard system was structured so needed to assign your 8 daily working hours to specific project so the clients could be billed for the hours spent. Very easy when you have only 3 to 4 projects, you can allocate 3 hours here, 2 hours there, etc. HR and management insisted that we follow this same strategy. But with our new role, we were touching 20+ projects a day, for a few moments at a time. When we started putting our time in as just non-project specific admin work, HR said this was unacceptable and we absolutely had to break our daily time down by project. Our manager seemed to think it was as simple as keeping a spreadsheet throughout the day of 20 minutes on Project A, 10 minutes on Project B, etc., as if anyone in an IT-type role works solely on one thing at a time. I would start to generate a report that covers 3 projects, send 4 emails for other projects while it generates, take phone call for a different project, bounce back to the first 3 until I took another phone call. The manager just didn't understand that we are not staring at the progress bar of a report being run or letting phone calls go to VM for a project we aren't currently editing. In comes the malicious compliance. You want a timecard broken down by project? Sure, but 45 minutes of our daily time was logged as non-billable admin time, to cover the time it was taking to make such a list broken down by project. My best one was logging in a 45-second phone call, and that was the only time spent on that project that week. So HR came back and asked me to fix the typo to minutes, and I said no, seconds was correct. It basically broke their system trying to bill a client for 45 seconds of work. Afterwards they quickly changed it so everything was logged as admin work, and they were able to come up with a system to properly bill clients for a general X hours per month for routine specialized review. Last one is titled, Boss Demands a Strict Dress Code. I'm a teacher, been teaching for close to 15 years. The first school I taught at was horrible. I loved my students, but the principal was horrible. It should have been a red flag that I was hired after her first year at the school, and she had like 30 plus spots to fill out of 110 staff. A ton of people jumped ship because of how bad she was. Not going to lie, the school was tough. We had trouble with gangs, drugs, fights, pregnancies, and it was just a school for 7th and 8th grade. There were some kids that were harder to reach because they were reacting to things the only way they knew. We also had some amazingly awesome kids. I would have easily still be there today 14 years later if it wasn't for that principal. I should also say that I am white woman. The school had 1,100 kids in it. Out of the 1,100, there were only 11 white kids. Out of the 110 staff, there were maybe 10 white staff members. Most of the kids were Hispanic or African American. Majority of the staff were African American as well, including the principal. I was some of the kids' first exposure to a white person. So the principal, who was a bully to students, staff and parents, systematically took away everything that was positive from the kids in school. The kids had to be in uniforms, but on Fridays they could wear jeans with their uniform shirt. She did away with that. She took away pep rallies. She took away field day. She once told us to be quieter while cheering for our kids at a soccer game. The 8th graders would get a dance at the end of the year. She took that away. A group of my girls wrote a letter asking her why did she take the dance away from everyone, even the kids who don't get into trouble and follow the rules, and why not just tell the kids who get into trouble that they can't come. They were too scared to ask her in person and too scared to give her the letter themselves. They asked me to give her the letter. When I tried, she refused to take it from me, saying, if they have something to say to me, they can give it to me themselves. One year, Halloween fell on a Friday. At the beginning of the month when we had our staff meeting, she made it very clear that we were not allowed to wear a costume of any kind. Throughout the month she sent multiple emails reminding us that costumes were not allowed. I show up that Friday in a dress that has giant flower print all over it. I don't normally wear dresses. I'd gone to a hobby store and gotten 2 giant fake flowers and made them into earrings. I also got a giant, red beehive wig. Voila, Mrs. Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. I'm a science teacher. She calls me into her office. This is pretty much our conversation. Her, Ms. X, were you at the faculty meeting in blah date? She has the sign-in sheet sitting in front of her so she knows I was there. Me, yes. Her, did you see my emails about no costumes? Me, I did. Her, did you understand the emails where I said no costumes? Me, I did. Her, why are you wearing a costume? Me, I'm not. I can tell by this point she is incredibly angry. She gestures towards me. Her, then what is that? Me, a dress, not a costume. Her, what is on your head? I feign ignorance and touch my head. Me, oh this, are we not allowed to wear wigs? Are you going to tell the staff? She herself was wearing a wig that day that I'd heard her brag about. Oh, she was upset but couldn't do a damn thing. All she did was tell me to get out of her office. Thanks for listening.